Starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So, good day, everybody. My name is Frank Harkins. I'm going to host this meeting today. I'd like to start by thanking you all for the time that you've taken out of what I know are busy schedules to join us. We're going to make sure that this is time well spent for you, and that we take maybe 40 minutes or so, and hopefully you'll get something out of it. Maybe to start off, you'll see a chat button on your screen. Could you let us know if you've got any problems with sound or any problems with being able to see slides, etc. And you can also use this button throughout the presentation if you've got any questions, comments. We've got a lady called Deb, who thankfully is much more technically proficient than I am, who's going to try and make sure that we get to any of those questions or comments at some stage throughout the meeting. So we've got a slight change to our schedule. So in the invite that we sent out, Compass were on there, and they're not actually going to present today, as they're about to launch some new features on their CRM software. So we're going to schedule a separate event with Compass in the next few weeks that will cover not only CRM in detail, but also some of the new features that Compass have introduced. So we've got Bob is going to be online for at least part of the session, and will help us answer any questions either during or after the session, but we're not going to go into it in depth. Gary's going to touch on it a little bit. So I'm going to host this session. As I said, my background is in your industry. I started at Xerox in sales many years ago in new business sales, and my career included managing the European reseller channel for HP, or Compaq as it was at the time. I've also run as general manager the Nordic business, Scandinavian business for Toshiba, and managed their direct and indirect sales. Currently, I'm working as a consultant for CEO Juice and focus on sales processes, and also with a sales coach who are on the presentation today, helping tailor their excellent training to the Copier dealer market. So making sure that the excellent work they put in place is tailored to your business. The more well-traveled and astute and maybe Downton Abbey fans will have spotted an English accent. I moved over to the USA last year, having been here many times. I have to say, being here, I'm fascinated by the electioneering that's going on in South Carolina and Iowa, etc. And as I'm not allowed to vote, it's even easier, actually. I can just enjoy the theater of it all without worrying where I cast my vote. There's only one thing that's got me a bit nervous, is I'm living in Southern California, where there are a lot of beautiful people. In fact, my co-presenters are probably the exception to that, actually, in terms of the beautiful people. So being a bit vain, I thought I'll get some cosmetic work done now I'm out here, maybe a bit of teeth whitening, a bit of Botox. But I'm also tight with money, so I figured I'll nip across the border to get this essential work done cheaply. But I've heard of this fella, Donald Trump, who's been speaking a lot about building a big wall next to Mexico, which is going to scupper all of my plans. So I'm going to try and get that in very quickly while I'm here. And in a second, I'm going to hand you over to Gary Lavin, who heads up CEO Juice. Gary's Irish, so if you notice any tension between us in the handover process, you're right to notice it. It's a result of centuries of animosity between our two nations, which will culminate in a big rugby match this weekend. The other two presenters today, Jim and John, head up Sales Coach, and thankfully they're proper Americans, so we should get on fine, actually. Maybe a few language difficulties, but other than that, that should be good. So in terms of how things are going to look today, this is the agenda, and it's pretty much what we sent out to you guys in the invite. 45 minutes, including questions, and as I said, you can hit the chat at any time. We'll either cover it at the end, or Debs will help interject, and we'll try and cover it on the fly. Understanding the buyer's process, we believe this has changed significantly in our market and in your market, but in most cases, dealers haven't adapted to that change, so we want to look at that. We want to look at how new technologies like HubSpot can generate opportunities and allow sales to actually focus on those opportunities. As the buyers have become more astute, it's getting harder to get appointments with these guys and to drive more leads. So we're going to look at some of the exciting new ways to address that. In terms of leveraging your promoters, Gary's going to touch on this and look at how your existing customer can help you generate new customers. And in terms of the sales processes, really that's where Jim and John are going to come in. It's one thing to drive new opportunities, but if your message isn't clear enough or your sales guys aren't properly prepared, you won't maximize those sales. So Jim and John are going to look at that in detail. So I'd now like to hand over to Gary and ask him to talk a little bit more about how buyers have evolved in our market and what that means for us. Gary, over to you.
Thanks, Frank. So jumping to the next slide. I'm still seeing the old slide. Oh, there we go. So Marketo is one of the competitors to HubSpot. There's really three players in the market. Marketo, Pardo, which got purchased by Salesforce, and HubSpot. But I was at a major Marketo meet a while ago, and an example they used, which I liked a lot, was around the automobile industry. And the way they explained it, in the old days, you went to buy a car, especially buying a used car, and the sales guy had all the power because the sales guy knew everything about that car, and their job was just to sell it to you at the best possible price. But today, when you go to buy a car, you can actually do just about all the research you need before you show up at that sales guy's lot. You can get a history on the car. You can see what cars with similar mileage and specs are selling for, and you can be just very much more informed than just 10 years ago. You're also probably going to do a lot of research at the manufacturer side, because typically that's where you go versus the dealer side. And so you have to be aware that a lot of this online research on the Copier marketplace may well be taking place on what's essentially your competitor sites, because they have the site that everybody wants to go to. And today, when you go to buy a car or just about anything, before you meet with the sales guy, you're going to do all of this research online and kind of figure out what you're interested in. But then after you've met with the salesperson, you're likely to go back home or back to the office and review the information that you got from the sales guy, and just make sure that what you're seeing online matches up with what you heard from the sales guy. So hit the next slide there, Frank, when you're ready. So this new process of the sale happening online was something that Google actually did a study on. They partnered up with CEB. And what they determined as part of this study is that 50% of the sales process is happening before the sales guy is involved. So it's happening in this online space. And Deb's going to post a link in the chat window to this research. But really, you don't even need to read the study. I mean, you know that if you're going to the movies today, it used to be that if there was a good trailer, you would go see the movie. But now the first question, certainly from my kids, is what's the rating? And it's very obvious what's a good movie and what's a bad movie just based on the ratings. The same with restaurants. It used to be that you would see an interesting looking restaurant from the outside and you would venture in. But now you pull your phone out and you hit Yelp or Google, and you're able to see straight away what the reviews for that restaurant is. If I'm out and about, the first thing I say is only show me the 4-star reviews. I'm not interested in going to any other restaurants. So this whole issue of being able to BS about, having a great product or a great service or great food or it being a great movie is gradually moving away as all of this information becomes available online. So jump on for me, Frank. So what what I see with untrained sales guys is they're always going to say, buy from me because I have the best product, I have competitive pricings, I have all of these features, and our service department rocks. We really are the business. But unfortunately, when that sales guy goes to work for a competitor, they're saying the exact same message: best product, best service, competitive pricing. And all the prospect hears is, well, these products all look the same to me. I can't tell the difference. So it's kind of the same product. And the service, everybody's saying they have the best service. So everybody's got the same best service. So there's nothing different there. So what's left is price. So if you allow your sales guys to get into this mode of just talking best service and best product, they're inevitably going to end up just selling on price because they'll have nothing else to differentiate. When I started my second dealership, I put all of my sales team through Jim and John's sales training. They had to go twice a week. And the biggest challenge I had in getting my head around a concept was that not everyone was a prospect. And back when I started at Xerox in the days, you were told sell to everybody. Whereas Jim and John's training was much more about focusing on the customer that's a good fit for you. And while in the old days you could BS a lot about whether or not you were a good fit, that's becoming more and more difficult. So I think it's becoming more and more critical that you have a sales process that helps you focus on what's different about your company, why people should want to buy from you, and even taking it so far as, is this customer or this prospect a good fit for the services we offer? Because not everybody is a prospect. At least that's my belief. So sales training and processes is going to become more and more important as all of this research starts to move online. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the things, some of the information that CEOs can get you to help you differentiate your company. But it becomes important that you have this information available online. So whatever your sales process is, and at Juice, we're huge process fans, and we don't believe if you don't have a process, if there isn't a set way for things to happen, it's really kind of difficult to make the process happen because there is no process to ensure it happens right. So having not just a defined sales process in place, but having a website that mirrors that process and that contains all of the key information that's going to be different about your company, I feel is really important as this technology evolves. We want to be able to see what your buyer cares about, what links they're clicking, etc. And though that information has to be available online. So next slide, is it? So I think we're passing back to John at this stage.
Yeah, that's right, Gary. It's over to Jim and John.
So we'll take the next few slides here and kind of crystallize a little bit differently this buyer's process. But if we look at this, selling's changed, but salespeople haven't. And with the availability of information, it used to be that the salesperson was the one that brought that information, and that no longer works. You commoditize yourself if you do that. And today, if we look at the market itself, we're dealing with busier and busier people. There's too many interruptions during the day, so to try to make contact with decision makers is getting harder and harder. And the deals themselves are getting bigger. The dollar volume is getting bigger, and there's more people involved in the sale. So what we'd like to do with, Frank, if you could give me the next slide, please, is crystallize for you a little bit more this buyer's process so that you see how it impacts you. Now, before I get into this a little bit, let me ask you a question. Do people like salespeople? Do they trust salespeople? You know, do they think of people as salespeople as being objective and honest, or do they look at salespeople as being subjective and having a tendency to exaggerate? You know, the prospects that we call on, they know that we're paid when we get with them to sell them, and because of this, they've developed some habits, and this is going to crystallize this buyer's process a little bit for you, but they've developed some habits that are very defensive when they're around people that they think are selling. And the first step here is they generally mislead or hand out a carrot. Now, what's a mislead? You've probably all been at home and you've received a phone from an internet marketing company or a robocall. You know, how long does it take you to know that it's a cold call? And you know, it's today, if there's a pause, you know that. And we make a decision to hang up before sometimes we ever even listen. Well, in our buyers, oftentimes, you know, you may know a lease is coming up, but you talk to them and talk about the lease, and they say, no, we're covered, we're covered. They're not just ready to be involved in the sale yet. And it's kind of this bit of a lie. And it's sometimes this whole part of, you know, buyers are liars, you hear. But they also hand out a carrot. And by a carrot, especially when they start to shop for things, they've been online, but the salesperson comes, and now they'll say things to the salesperson. They'll want to get in control very quickly by asking questions. And they'll say things like, well, what do you guys have? And what's different? And what could I expect from you? Sometimes this mislead and carrot can be different too. You know, they can say something like, you know, we're getting 4 quotes and price is the most important thing. When in reality they're really not getting 4 quotes. And the research will show price is rarely the issue. But what they want to get from the salesperson, they want to get into control, they want to find out information. And they look at the salesperson and think about it. What does the salesperson know? They know their products, their pricing. They know competitive products, competitive pricing. They know other companies that have had same issues and managed services, you know, issues and problems that they're trying to solve. And the buyer wants to get as much of this free information from the salesperson. And then, do they ever make a decision when they get this information? Rarely. It's always some form of a think it over, some form of a stall. Now, at this point, it's very rare for them to say no. Why? I mean, it's in our society, it's really interesting. People rarely reject other people. They rarely say no. We don't want to hurt feelings. So they'll always say things like, you know, we need to think this over. You know, can you get me some form of a proposal or a quote? And then their next step is just very simply they're going to sort their options. They get as many as they can. They shop around. And then, you know, just like that, now they disappear. And from the salesperson's standpoint, you'll know you're in this because when the prospect is very easy to see when they're looking for the free information. But once they're in that shopping phase, they get very, very difficult to see. Now, so why do buyers use this? They essentially do it because it's control. They want control. It's very defensive. It's, you know, buyer beware. Sort out your options. Now, what I'd like to do is turn this over to Jim for the next slide and have Jim cover what traditional selling looks like right next to this. So, Jim?
Yeah, okay, thank you, John. So what we've done here is over on the right-hand side, we've kind of paired up the what the traditional sales process has been. We paired it up against the buyer's process, and so there's a few points I want to make here. You know, after the prospecting, you know, part of selling is done, and you're kind of face to face with a prospect. You know, the first thing the salesperson is tasked with doing is to qualify the opportunity. And oftentimes, salespeople aren't very good at qualifying, but what's really interesting is when the buyer misleads people. Sometimes they say things like, you know, we've heard a lot of good things about your company, and you know, we need to make a decision on getting a new you know, a new copier or a new this or a new that. You know, need to do it in the next 60 days, and you know, you've been highly recommended, blah, 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 blah. And you know, tell me a little bit about what you guys can do for us. So when the salesperson hears that, I mean, what's going through their mind is, whoa, I've got a qualified prospect here. They need what I've got. They've heard good things about me. And then the buyers, you know, starts asking questions like, you know, tell me about your company, or tell me about what you've got, or what are my options here. And salespeople who have, you know, historically been very well trained in product knowledge, they launch into some sort of a sales pitch. They talk about features, they talk about benefits, they talk about the stuff, you know, we've been in business for 20 years, lots of satisfied customers, yada, yada, yada. They keep going. And so all of a sudden the salesperson has launched into this lengthy sales pitch. That sales pitch continues because the prospect starts asking questions. And salespeople are very comfortable answering the questions because of the training they've had. So this goes on for quite some time, and it typically ends up with the prospect asking for some sort of a proposal or a quote or something like that. So at that point, and this may be a subsequent meeting, and typically in a larger sale it typically is, salesperson comes back and presents a proposal to the prospect. And, you know, if you think about what goes on with you and your people and the typical salesperson out there, when the salesperson, once the salesperson has made the presentation, the only thing left for them to do is to ask for the business. Unfortunately, many salespeople don't even bother to do that. But let's assume that they do. And I would say when we poll the people in our training, 8 times out of 10, 80% of the time, what they get when they say, so can we do business together, whatever their closing thing is, 8 times out of 10 they get to think it over. Salespeople at that point can do a couple of things. They can push harder to try to turn it into a yes, but they know from experience that they're probably going to wind up with that think it over. And so they leave, and while the prospect is thinking it over, clearly what they're doing is, you know, they're shopping around. But then the salesperson's next step in their process, because they haven't got a yes, they haven't got a no, they got a maybe. The next step in their process, they got to go into the follow-up thing, and that becomes, you know, the repetitive calls, and they start chasing and they start pestering, and, you know, typically salespeople are closing 15 to 20% of the proposals that they deliver. So finally, the prospect isn't taking the calls anymore, if they ever were, and the salesperson at that point kind of gives up, moves on, and starts the whole process over again with another suspect. So if that sounds familiar to you, that's what's going on in 80 to 90%. With 80 to 90% of the salespeople that are out there. It's a real problem, folks. So I'll turn it back over to you, John.
So to sell more effectively, you know, number one, it's so important to implement some form of a repeatable sales process. Somebody else is to have it, because if you don't have a process that is more effective than the buyer's process always takes control. It's very seductive, and salespeople just fall for it all the time. You know, sales is one of the last parts of major businesses to really implement process. You know, we've got Six Sigma and Lean and manufacturing, accounting, but the salesperson has been kind of left to his own devices. But you really need a repeatable sales process that can constantly be refined. Jim, you want to take this next point?
Yeah, I will, but let me add something on the repeatable sales process. If you, as John said, if you don't have a process, you are going to default to the buyer's process every time. And if you do have a process, one of the nice things about it is you can go back and you can look at your sales process. If you don't get the business, if something goes sideways on you, which it does many times, you go back and look at your process and maybe do a little bit of an autopsy and figure out where things went south. The next one's really critical, and it's ditch the sales pitch. The sales pitch has become very redundant. With the availability of information that people have via the internet, if they are a serious or semi-serious buyer, they've already looked you up on the internet. They know how long you've been in business. They know what it says on your homepage. And when salespeople come in and sit down with a buyer, again, a busy buyer who doesn't have a whole lot of time to talk to salespeople, and they start going into the pitch, think about what happens. The buyer goes, I already know this. I'm really more interested in talking to somebody who can help me resolve a problem. So I'm going to say if you want to do a sales pitch, it's got to be really short, 30 to 60 seconds at the most, and then transition in by saying, enough about me. Let's talk a little bit about why I'm here today and what you're looking for. So, John, I think that kind of segues okay into the next bullet point here.
And it's all about asking insightful, pain-oriented questions. And it might sound counterintuitive, but you get your credibility from your questions. And questions are the most powerful form of communications. What we want to do is we want to help the prospect facilitate a discovery. And especially in the services industry, you win the business in this investigative stage. So we want to get away from this pitch. One thing everybody should look for is after every call to ask the question, how much talking did I do and how much talking did the prospect do? And in a good call, the prospect should be talking 70 to 80% of the time, but that all comes from asking great questions. And these questions are questions that, again, need to be practiced overall. They're the way they're delivered to get them to answer. That's not an interrogation here, but it's helping this person think through an issue. Jim, on problems?
Yeah, deals are very different today than they were a few years ago. I mean, you have more people involved. The investment is typically larger. I mean, think about the copier industry. It used to be just about selling a box, and today there's a whole lot of other things that are involved. And so the deals are more complex, and when they become more complex, they create more problems for people, and people need to be able to talk to a salesperson that comes across as a problem solver as opposed to a product pusher. And if the salesperson is doing all the talking, they do come across as a product pusher. So today, and we see this in all the research, people are looking for problem solvers because the deals the problems that they're trying to resolve are bigger, more complex, and they're looking for salespeople that can help them sort through the options, and even more importantly, can bring new ideas to the table. So I'll kind of leave you with this. Product pushers do a lot of talking. Problem solvers, if you're going to be a good problem solver, you got to be very good at asking questions. And as John said, asking questions is where you get your credibility, and more importantly, or at least just as important, when you start asking questions, you are going to start differentiating yourselves from all those other folks out there that are still in the product pusher stage. John, back to you.
And, you know, in our training, we always ask our participants, you know, this question, is selling a skill? And they all answer, yeah, it is. And then, you know, we ask the question, is there any skill that you can get better at without practice? And they all know that intuitively there are no skills you can get better at without practice. So when we think of selling and selling skills and people skills and listening skills and qualifying skills, investigating skills, you know, meeting management skills, closing skills, these are all skills that can be practiced, and without practice they're perishable. And they're all little components that really good selling today is doing hundreds of things correctly. And there's a compounding effect that as you start to get better at certain things here, you know, you get 1%, 2% better a week because it takes time to develop these skills. You know, the days of drive-by training are over. You know, reinforcement becomes really, really key. So we hope that we've given you some things to think about with your sales team. It's important to have a process. It's important to do a lot more listening, ask a lot more questions. You know, have this whole mindset of helping the prospect solve problems rather than pushing, you know, products to them, and thinking of selling as a skill, something that, you know, can be honed with deliberate practice. Now, with that, I'd like to turn it back to Gary to start to cover some of the information on HubSpot.
Thanks, guys. I should add I'm a big fan of the, well, sales training in general, but these guys in particular, I think it had a huge impact on our business. A lack of questions. Is everybody bored? Frank, are you yawning? All right, so let's talk about HubSpot.
You go for it, Gary.
So the magic with HubSpot, and it's the most exciting piece of software I have ever worked with, is that it takes that power shift back. It gives you visibility into that percentage of the sale that's taken place online. And it's really, really powerful. So the old days, you know, I would get the sales guys a list of all of the copiers where the leases were up for renewal in the next 12 months. And I might give it to a telemarketing team, but typically it would go straight to the sales guy. And you start making calls. But today, instead of doing that, you feed that list into HubSpot and you send emails to these people. And in the emails, you talk about some of the problems that these new features will address. So you talk about scanning, you talk about document management, you talk about things that are available on the latest technologies, and then you check and see who has clicked the link and what link have they clicked. And now all of a sudden, instead of giving the sales guys a list of 100 customers whose leases are up in the next 12 months, you're giving them a list of the 15 companies who actually are interested in new products because they have this technology. And as long as you have your website set up to break out the different pieces, the different problems, and the different pieces of what's different about your company, then you can see, you know, who cares about the fact that your billing accuracy is really good, or that your net promoter score is really strong, and reminding you all that the manufacturer site is probably going to win if you just focus on products. If all the sales guys do is push products, then the chances are that your prospect is going to go to the manufacturer's site, because that's just the way it is. I certainly know that was the way in my automobile experience. Looking at a new car, I went to the manufacturer's site. I came back to the dealer site to see inventory, but I did most of my research at the manufacturer's site. So unless you're getting your guys talking about the stuff that's different about you and getting the customers going, well, hey, yeah, these products are all the same, but the service is vastly different. And let me understand why I might want to deal with the local company, etc. So, you know, Net Promoter Score is one definite thing that we think you can push, that's quantifiable, that's able, you know, hey, we have a system for tracking customer satisfaction levels. And Deb, you can post a couple more of those links for, so ID 470, probably most of our clients are already using that, you're familiar with that, but we have just started a process to track billing accuracy. And we all know that after service calls, the next thing that customers get most upset about is billing. And we all, especially us dealers, know that's a big advantage we have over the manufacturers. And you know, the original company I started selling for starts with an X, and we had a challenge in that area. So being able to say, hey, we track that stuff with an independent third party, and here's our number, and here's how it compares. And being able to show your service stats, and being brave enough to pull up your survey responses, and having some key data that's not just the same as everybody else, and having it available online so people can see it, and then giving you insight into who's looking at what. So that's the magic of HubSpot. Next slide, please, Frank. Again, most of you guys are already using our closed call survey, and we're tracking promoters. And by definition, a promoter is somebody who says, I am likely to recommend you to a friend or colleague. So they're saying, I'm happy to recommend you. Some of them are even posting great comments about how wonderful you are. So why not leverage that stuff? So Deb, if you want to post 789. 789 is our new process for identifying what key services your company offers, and then allowing you to see which customers are using or not using those key services. Jump back a sec, Frank. You've gone a slide ahead. Oh no. And we are pushing that data. In fact, we're looking for some beta sites. We're pushing that data into Compass. So in each of the customer records in Compass, you can see what the key service is. We also are integrating with HubSpot, and Compass is integrating with HubSpot. And within HubSpot, HubSpot is kind of a CRM, but it tracks a lot of that additional NAIC data. You know, what type of company is this? How many employees? What size revenue? And as we start to do things like look at your profitable customers, tell you who your happy customers are based on Net Promoter Score, and start to help you identify what that ideal customer looks like, we're now able to also tell you who's out there in your territory in the HubSpot database, because they have this phenomenal 19 million company database. Who's a match? What's a prospect out there that has the same profile as your ideal customer? And then we want to start leveraging these promoters and saying, hey, I noticed that you're not using our managed network services, and said you're highly likely to recommend us. Well, how about recommending us to whoever at your organization is responsible for your networks? And with tools like HubSpot, we can fully automate that process, right down to collecting the information of who's responsible for that new stuff. We're starting to push our account review into Compass. That's coming up in the next month or so, where the sales guy will be able to pull up the account review directly from Compass. So when you're doing those quarterly business reviews, we're also pushing in that key services information. So So as the rep meets with an existing account, they're able to easily see which key service they're not using and make sure they talk about that. HubSpot has some very cool tools to allow the sales guys to see who's opening their emails, what links are they clicking, what pages are they visiting. And because of that, most sales guys will want to use HubSpot to track the emails they send. So if they use HubSpot to track the emails, that starts to give us a whole new metric for understanding sales performance. So we all know that most of the interaction between a sales guy and a prospect happens in emails, with the occasional phone call and hopefully the occasional meeting. But being able to see which of the emails that your sales team is sending out are actually getting links clicked on them starts to tell us whether or not they're dealing with a hot prospect or not. And as we look at things like deals that are forecasted to close next week, and start to look, well, has that prospect clicked any of our emails that we sent them? Have they looked at these pages? We think we can bring some key additional data. We're also looking to leverage some of the Compass and the HubSpot data to help with sales training. And as I said, I'm a big fan of sales training, but we think we can do things to help focus on where the sales guy is getting stuck. And like the guy mentioned, if you don't have a process, it's kind of hard to know where you're getting stuck. But let's say, for example, that they're not meeting with the decision maker. So one of the things Compass has added for us, or is about to show in a new release, is the option for you to pick a decision maker on every opportunity, because obviously the decision maker changes based on the size of the deal. And so now the sales guy in Compass can say, okay, I've identified who the decision maker is, and that's who I'm meeting with. And then we, putting some automation behind that, can start to look and see, okay, which of the sales team are not meeting with decision makers. And then we can start pushing content to them. So Sales Coach, and I'm sure most of the sales training companies that you guys are using have content available online. So we're able to say to the sales guy, here's a video on getting through to the decision maker. And after they watch that, we can ask them a series of questions to see that they understand that. So we're able to start to push some targeted training to these guys based on data that we see in HubSpot and data that we see in the CRM. So I put, if any of you guys are interested in HubSpot, it's an expensive product. Relatively speaking, it's a lot less expensive than a telemarketing team. But I have put the email address of the HubSpot guy we'd like you to contact if you are interested, and just tell them you're working with CEO Juice, because we have to get access to your data. So jump ahead, Frank. So kind of summarizing this, the point I'm trying to make is that the process is changing, and the old days, you can kind of still get away with a little BS and sell stuff, but it's becoming more and more difficult. And so sometime soon, you just flat out won't be able to say you have outstanding service, because a competitor will be able to say, well, hey, you got a Net Promoter Score of -20. How the hell is that good? So HubSpot can help you focus on the opportunities, but you need the sales training side, to match that up and make sure you have a fit, because in my opinion, not everybody is a prospect. Leveraging your promoters, it's the low-hanging fruit. We're ready to start testing that. We've got one or two customers kind of ready to roll, but any of you who's got HubSpot in place, we're ready to start pushing that message out to them. And the whole magic is getting sales processes that help you close more deals. And the way I found with my team, back when I had a dealership, my logic was I wanted them to lose the deal in the first 5 minutes or not at all. I wanted them to find out straight off where we're going to be a fit, and I would be really upset if we ended up being number 2, where we'd invested a ton of time and effort but didn't win the business. I wanted us to lose the business straight off or not at all. So any questions? Hopefully our presentation's been just so clear and concise and not everybody's asleep. Deb's got, if you stick out that last link, it's just a place for you to give us feedback. So let us know. We don't do a whole lot of webinars, and I'm particularly excited about HubSpot, but I'm also aware that you need some other pieces in place for it to be effective.
Gary, I was just to interject, I think we're probably out of time there, and I would just echo your thoughts. Firstly, thanks to you and to Jim and John. I felt there's a lot of exciting things going on and a lot of things that can help dealers in 2016. And to echo your thoughts, we'll follow up with everybody who was on the call. So feel free to get in touch with us directly if there's anything you'd like more detail on. We can do that on a one-to-one basis, and likewise, if there's areas that we didn't touch on today that you think could be relevant for you, then just let us know, and we'll do that on a one-on-one basis.
I do have one question pop up from Susie Frank. She's asking, can you describe how HubSpot integrates with our network or CRM or CEO Juice?
Gary, you're probably best placed. You've actually been using HubSpot for your business for a while now. Can you feedback to Susie on that?
Yeah. So HubSpot is basically a whole separate application. It's a whole new product. It's kind of like Constant Contact, but so much more than Constant Contact. You could replace HubSpot or its competitors, but you'd need a whole bunch of different tools. So the last link that Deb just pushed out there is what's called a landing page. It's basically a website for you to go to, but the only way you could have got to it is from this meeting, because I created it specifically for it. So HubSpot makes it very easy for us to create landing pages. Then once you visit that page, HubSpot's going to capture your information. So I'm going to know you were there. I'll know the IP address of your computer. I'll know every time you come back to visit our page again. I'll know where you go from there. It'll ask you for some information, and essentially you're updating our CRM. So you know, we'll ask you for your first name, last name, email address, and all of that populates back into our CRM. So a better example would be if I emailed a promoter and said, hey, you're not using this key service, but you should be, and I noticed you're happy to recommend this, would you forward this email on? And that promoter forwards it on, and the contact they forward it to clicks the link. Then when that contact puts the first name, last name, email address, and perhaps job role, they're the kind of the 4 basic things we ask for. That's, if that contact doesn't exist, which they probably don't, that's automatically populating the CRM for us. And then HubSpot's going out and pulling the rest of the street address, the website, the NAIC code, the number of employees, the phone number, fax number. HubSpot pulls all of that. It's called data augmentation in. So HubSpot's kind of a CRM, but not really a CRM. It's kind of a constant contact. It's a place to manage all of your LinkedIn pages, your Facebook posts, your Twitter posts. I mean, there's a lot to it, but I'm a fan. Starts at about $1,200 a month, so it's not cheap, but a lot cheaper than hire a telemarketing team. Any other questions?
Okay, thank you, Gary. On behalf of you, on behalf of Jim and John, I'd like to thank everybody who took time out today. We hope it was useful for you. And as I say, just to reiterate, by all means, get in touch if there's anything you'd like more detail on, whether it's the sales process, training, whether it's the HubSpot. Just get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to get involved. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
And we'll have a link. So in that link that Deb just posted, we'll have a link to a recording. So if you wanted to access the recording afterwards, just again hit that link. Okay, thanks, gang. See you later, guys.